Hello. This is the second of our attempts to answer questions related to painting. Really, I like to think of these as sort of informal talks about art, or at least the painting art, as I know it. Let's give it another shot. One of the nice things that happened last week was I got a question, but also had a nice compliment in it. And I'll give you the question, but the compliment was simply that the individual calling, his name was Michael. He was just saying he believed, I don't know what his background is, but he's saying he believed that we had a nice solid program. So I've been teaching for 35 years, and I hope that's the case. But the question went with it was, do we use the Bargue plates in the program? Now, this is an atelier program, so everybody assumes today that the Bargue plates are some significant part of it. My training with Gamel, there was no use of the Bargue plates. Gamel would sometimes refer to certain things for us to consider copying from time to time. And he had a few of those full-sized Bargue plates. And I don't recommend against using the Bargue plates, but I don't use them as a part of the training program, except to point to a student occasionally who's having trouble just seeing what kind of quality they can get out of a piece of charcoal, and maybe to enlighten them a little bit about what finer modeling looks like, and those kinds of plates have it. Part of the reason I don't recommend those plates, though, is that I think those plates are what got people started, probably. And of course, it's related. Those plates were related to Jérôme, so there's a significant thing going on back in those days in the way they draw that is related to something I consider pretty destructive over time, and that is the construction or the constructive method of painting, where you hack out a bunch of angle lines in the middle of nowhere, and then try to draw. And that's what's implied, at least, by the way people talk about those now and use them. That's an approach to drawing, and frankly, you won't find that approach to drawing historically. For example, throughout the Renaissance, you see people drawing the shapes they see. I mean, people sometimes do put in certain lines that aren't precisely the look of nature, but most of them, especially the Italians, but French as well, will simply be going after the long line, what Sargent would call the long line, what would be called a memorized line. And I find that that's a far more strategic plan. The idea that's associated with that construction drawing, which is angles, and particularly angles between 2 points, is a well-referenced and highly useful behavior for a student, provided you understand to some degree what a point is. We talked about some of that last week. Inevitably, there are points, and between those 2 points, there'll be an angle. A point simply might be, say, the end of my finger here and the end of my finger there. You could say those are points, and therefore you can see an angle between those 2 points. And that point angle thing is a big deal that you must get right in the articulation of this shape. But in fact, Degas gives a lot of positive feedback about that in one statement, where he says anybody making a line with that much authority, and he does mean that line, must have known where he was starting and where he's going to end, or in this case, maybe just going from here to here, where he's starting, where he's going to end. That's an angle issue, right? So you have points and angles constantly being referred to. So the Bargues, the content of the Bargue implied in that Bargue exercise is one thing, and then the other thing is that I've never seen anything. Maybe it's just me being ignorant, but I've never seen anything of a description in French or any other place of a Bargue method. So use of Bargue plates is one thing, but where's the method that they actually describe? Interesting. It's just an interesting question. Or are those angles in those plates simply being misused? In fact, they're just simply pointing out that there are angles between leading points around a figure. So no, they do create a good point of discussion. I don't like the idea that those plates are now reduced in scales. They're not even. It's not impossible to do what they're doing in charcoal. You wind up having to use pencil or things like that to get a similar kind of look. And I think that's actually slightly problematical, but. Nevertheless, I mean, they were undoubtedly being done. Those plates were lithographs, which would frequently have very much the look. A good lithograph can have precisely the look of a charcoal. And to the extent that it does, of course, it'd be very useful providing it's in good focus and that sort of thing, for a person trying to figure out whether or not charcoal can even be beautiful to look at. So I made a long answer out of a short question. The answer is this: my studio, we don't use those plates. Gamble never used them that I know of. He certainly only recommended, ancillary use, or at least having a look at them is probably all he did. We did not copy them, as far as I never did, and I don't think anybody else did either. If I see a second question here, it's a kind of a question that you get from time to time as a teacher. You get them from students who are ambitious to get on, or maybe just are getting broke and they need to get on selling pictures. And the question comes up, when can I sell my pictures and that sort of thing. But in this particular question, David ties this to another question, which is something he said I keep getting asked: when are you going to develop your own personal style? And I think that's actually a really important question. Everybody today, because of modern art and modern art training, believes that style, that is, that your personal statement is the thing. But it isn't. It never has been the thing. It's never been about your personal statement, except in a limited way, and maybe in a totally massive way. And that is that it's your brain that's coming through. You're sitting there before nature, at least if you're an impressionist, like the Boston School guys. You're sitting before nature and you're drawing forth the beauties you see with this amazing dedication to truth. I mean, it's interesting that both Tarbell and Tarbell and Joseph DeCamp at different times talk about trying to get the thing to look like, or in the case of DeCamp, saying paint straight and true like a Christian. That obviates style. And I don't mean it eliminates it, because every hand has in it, much like your voice, has in it its own intonation, its way of hearing, your way of hearing, the family you came out of, the culture you come out of. There's always going to be all these influences that make you unique. But today there's this crazy pursuit of style. And I think of it as the problem that's associated with art. Is art going to imitate art, or is art actually based on nature? Is it founded in nature, and is it actually simply and again, I suggest to you for the Impressionists, but even for the base of a fiction painter, which is the way I think of people doing imaginative work, the base is in the truth to nature, the fidelity to nature. One of the things I see over time that weakens a painter, like Rubens, for example, according to the discussions that have gone on, Rubens keeps on, and I'm talking about between painters, among painters who really know what they're talking about. Rubens keeps finding himself a notch below, like at the second tier of great painters, and style may be the reason for that. The fact is he turns everybody into a Rubens. And it eventually becomes burdensome as you leave that generation, as you leave the Rococo style, and we lose our appreciation for those wobbly-legged women or those oozing outs and ins, much like the pillars of those times. When you lose your love of that, and when that's the weight of that style begins to challenge the viewer and make you less interested than a guy who has a disinterested pursuit of truth, which I think you see in Titian. I think you see, even a person who's heavily stylized in a sense, and I don't think it's intentional stylization, like Michelangelo. The dedication to truth is ridiculously strong, and I'm suggesting that the personality will simply come through. What you need to do is put in your 10 years of well-directed practice, and then finders, just keep painting and keep pursuing the right thing, making a quality composition, getting good color schemes, and handling the relationships with honesty and integrity in the pursuit of the beauty of those relationships. And you will find yourself in a special place. But when that happens, and then can you tie that to making money? Do you see what it is, though? And that's the crazy thing about our times. You can tie, I've mentioned this before, I don't know if I did it here in our context, but you can tie being a bad lawyer to making money. Laws, for my money, the modern abuse of tort, of suing people, as a result of lawyers not being dedicated to justice. Their main cause, it seems to me, ought to be justice. And when we start getting dark, it's when we lose our focus on that. So what is your main purpose in being a painter, right? It's truth and beauty. Or you better figure it out if it's not truth and beauty. But so you can sell a picture because you stylize, because you tweak it in some odd way. Well, good luck with that and sell some pictures. But wonder if you want to pursue, a bigger, deeper, richer vein, I think I'd like to say, of gold that comes with the pursuit of something that has nothing to do with your immediate satisfaction, something to do with long, deeper stuff. So it's always been my answer, and I've never pursued dollars. I've always pursued doing my job right, and to whatever extent I've got the qualities that I've wanted and yearned for, it's because of staying true to that and not leaving off and wandering this way and that way. You hate seeing guys like Picasso, who he said that I was just making a fool of myself for the generation I was in. They wanted to have their little. He mentioned certain people with money and no standards, wanting to have their little, I forget what he said. Their little tweak of fun, and he said, "I just amuse people." I thought of myself as being, but he says in other places that he was considered himself not even to be a painter in the great sense of the word. I think that's a tragedy. Kincaid himself, the painter who recently died, and was not one of those guys who at the end of his life regretted the path he'd taken, which I do believe actually got him quite rich. And so you can ask or consider when you read those guys' conversations whether or not that's the path you want to be on. But those paths are both very much about pursuing money and stuff, and things like style and all sorts of tweaks of this great art form. They become so dominant that you can't. You've lost your mother thought. I keep on saying to students, by the way, in this conversation, remember what brought you here. What is it that made you want to be a painter? Was it somebody's cute little manners or some, or what was it? I mean, wasn't it something about beauty and truth? I just have a hard time, even myself personally, looking at pictures that don't have a deep, profound sense of truth, of this long time spent before nature in the pursuit of something true. And yes, of course, yeah. Have you found the beauty? It's like the measure of the quality of your search for truth. I quote from time to time Einstein, who was dismissing a doctoral student or whatever who had brought a theory into him, and he dismissed it within a short period of time and handed it back to the guy and said, "It's not beautiful." And I suggest to you that tricks and devices and stunts aren't beautiful. That's not beauty anymore. They're tricks, they're stunts, they're clever, they're pretty, they're a lot of things. But consider your ways would be one way of speaking about it in the greatest sense of that. So yeah, so there's a couple. I wonder if there's one more related to those that I probably should take a look at. There are a number of questions that keep coming in this subject, so I'm going to do a short version of this one to end off this program, and then I'll try to pick up 3 or 4 more points on this one. But I think this is a good introduction. This says color, and it's from a David also, a different David. Color is only the ornamentation or frosting on the cake. And that's, of course, to an impressionist, a pretty, that's like a slap with a glove, right? The classic challenge. If there is no structure or proper values to create solid form, then colors won't help. So this is a composition question on one side, and it's purely a question of what color values are or color is. So maybe the first part of this thing I should address is the question of what painting is, of all the silly things. Why should we be talking about what painting is? But what painting is now we're not talking about etching. We're not talking about sculpture. Sculpture, by the way, is a 3-dimensional thing, right? Etching is in a sense a 1-dimensional thing because it lacks color. It's a black and white. Well, it's a black and white form. Painting is not a black and white form. Painting incorporates color, right? Now, if it doesn't, we think of it as an underpainting. We think of it as preparatory. We think of it as decorative for some purpose. For example, you see those sculptural reliefs, faux, things painted by different painters, Boucher. Michelangelo even uses them on the Sistine ceiling, where they're just monochromatic. Well, that's not what the art of painting is. The art of painting is a color problem. It's a color value problem, according to Hale. And Hale's an important read, the author of the book Vermeer. He was one of the Boston school painters. But he used the expression color values. He didn't put a dash in it, which I think he should have. Of course, the way he uses it is like it's a word, like it's color values. So to me, it's a moot point when you start simply saying this, no, the composition is just a values problem. Or if you're saying drawing is just a values problem, well, Hale actually argues for a full page that that's not the case. He's talking about Vermeer, and he says it's all of a piece. So if you talk about form, you certainly would be saying that there's the rounding, shall we say, of say my finger or my arm or the bowl of my hand here, the rounding of that is done by value movements, right? It's not done by color movements. But if you're talking about a flower, for example, it has a color movement, maybe even progressing along that form where it's going from this richer, darker red and getting more and more vague, but lighter as it goes in. This is it's a combination of color value. It's a color value question. And there's no writing one and not having the other, and there's no valuing one over the other. One is valuable for form, but the other one is valuable for something else. For example, the Boston School guys talk about the color on the wall. They didn't like Sargent to just move the values across the wall, going from light to dark and not change the colors when the colors were changing. Now, why would they be discussing that? Why was Sargent, the person who's asking me this question, I believe, would tell you that Sargent's right, that the color of movements in the background is not a factor. Well, a factor in what, though? Now, in number one, it's in truth, just the truth of the representation. It is a factor. If there's a color movement simultaneously or even integrated in any way with a values movement, it's hugely important. So how do you walk away from that? How do you not think of color and value simultaneously? But I'm going to end this just this way, and we're going to come back to the whole thing in a whole different discussion. I'm going to end it with this point, and that is, if you think that the art of painting, the holistic art of painting, which certainly, if you think of it holistically and you think to yourself, and I'm talking now about the problem of composition, if you think to yourself that it doesn't include color, then you're actually dismissing a phenomenon on the canvas in front of you that's going to affect the unity, either in a positive way or a negative way, right? The very idea of unity is there with that. Now, if you think that, for example, form and realism is all there is to a painting, well, you already missed the boat. The fact is, it's not about form. It's about the distribution of forms. It's about the play of form, right? It's about how things perform, like music in relation to each other. Once you see this certain kind of shall we say, a line. I love that Michelangelo thing. I think he uses the word counterpoint. And he's discussing this line on a hip being picked up by the inside of a calf. And the beauty of that long, beautiful, what you may as well think of there for a second as an S-curve. But the beauty of that that's an abstract beauty. That's not the beauty of a leg. That's a phenomena of nature that ultimately is what is the music of painting. It's the music of our art form. Not in that case, it's the music of sculpture or the music of drawing as well. But I'm suggesting that we need to think holistically about composition, about painting too, but specifically about composition. Composition is, at the very least, incorporates the line unity, the form unity, the value distribution unity, what they call the spotting, what Gemmell calls the spotting, but the color unity, the color harmony, the color play, right? They're all phenomenon in a good painting. Now, you can neglect them if you want. You can say the color doesn't matter, or you can put it in pretty little places, put color in pretty little places. But you're doing it at your own risk, and you're actually putting yourself sort of in a primitive state when it comes to understanding painting. By the time we get to Degas, by the time you actually see somebody taking the color, and the woke color, I like to say, that Monet talks about, By the time you get to somebody like Degas, who's actually using it in composition, not just getting good color in a picture, but and Veronese does compose with it. I'm not trying to say he doesn't, but he basically uses local color and puts like a nice green side by side with another green, the guy's costume, for example, and it'll look great. But what we're talking about is we're talking about this a very different game by the time you get to Degas. Degas actually, for the first time, respects color and puts it and gives it its full voice in a composition. And I suggest that a student of painting needs to not live in this locked-in place that was part and parcel with the academic mindset, which is a thing well drawn is well enough colored, and get yourself to the place where we've really come, which is that now color is a factor and it has to be considered on its own. Just like values is a factor that has to be considered in the sense of spotting differently from the form problem, or even than the shape problem, which is the pattern ideas that Gamble talks about and that's so prevalent in 19th century painting. And I'm talking about it just as a good example, Ang. So I was meant to be short on that one. So let's end with that one, and I'll see you next time. And thank you very much for your attention. Send your questions. My pleasure to talk.